If you enjoy Legends of Bass, please consider supporting me on Patreon. My patrons have access to great rewards, like bass tabs for every piece I play in this video. Click the link in the description to learn more. Hey guys, John here with another episode of Legends of Bass. Today's going to be a real exciting one. We're finally getting back to these episodes of Legends of Bass. If you're just tuning back into the channel and you're wondering where I've been for the last year, check out the last channel. I talked a little bit about that. But nonetheless, here we are. We're back with a new episode of Legends of Bass. And today we are covering one of my absolute favorite bass players and favorite bands. That is John Deacon of Queen. This is just, like I said, absolutely one of my favorite bands and one of my favorite players. He's so melodic. He's so creative. Mixes a lot of different techniques. And let's not forget also, for those of you who may not be aware, he actually penned a lot of Queen's greatest songs. Another one, Bites the Dust, You're My Best Friend, I think Spread Your Wings. I mean, there's a bunch. And as we go through the songs today, I'll be sure to point those out. But nonetheless, Queen is, like I said, again, one of my favorite bands. Always listening to them on and off. I was so into them in high school and everything. I actually broke out my old high school Queen shirt here. Doesn't really fit like it used to, but hey. There's been so much buzz around Queen lately. Many of you may have seen the Bohemian Rhapsody movie that came out. I thought it was great. Rami Malek, awesome dude, great part. Check him out in Mr. Robot too. Just great. Reignited my love for the band, the whole story, and the genius of Freddie and the rest of the band. And it got me thinking, hey, I've been trying to bring Legends of Bass back, and who better to kick it off with than John Deacon? So we're going to talk about the first big chunk of Queen's career in this episode. This is going to be a two-parter because I did want to cover the 70s stuff as well as some 80s stuff because he kind of changed as a player. So we're going to break it into two episodes. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to my patron, Chris Slade. Thanks for the continued support, Chris. For those of you who might be interested in Patreon, you can check it out. I'll put a link in the description. But please bear with me. I'm in the process of reworking it. I'm going to really simplify the Patreon to just a couple rewards and just make it a lot more streamlined. But if you're interested in supporting me, please check that link out. Just a quick note on equipment for this one before we get started. I'm playing my 2004 Mark Hoppus Jazz Precision bass. Kind of an interesting one. Was a huge Blink-182 fan, still am. In high school, and it was one of my first real basses. And it doesn't really get too much attention. I don't think I've played it in this on my channel at all here, but it really has some great pickups in it, and it has a nice high output sound. But given the nature of the setup right now and how I have a little higher action on it, it just sort of worked perfectly for me for these Queen songs. So that's what I'm using today. So the first song I want to talk about is their first single, Keep Yourself Alive. Now, this album, their first album, pretty straightforward, but there is some stuff that's out there. You can hear right off the bat, even though it's their early, sort of finding their footing of their sound, you undoubtedly know that it's Queen nonetheless. The Brian May guitar riffs, Freddie soaring vocals, and so on. So Keep Yourself Alive, it's a pretty straightforward rock tune, but I thought it was a great one to kick it off because it shows how John can sort of mix it up even when it's a simpler song. You'll see here he starts off with some nice grooves down on that low E string until he gets into the verse, and it's a lot of hammer-ons, so he makes it a little bit more interesting for a straightforward rock song, and some little bluesy, jazzy little walk-up pieces. And then the chorus is pretty straightforward, but it really punches against the drum beat. Pretty simple one just to get started here. Here it is, Keep Yourself Alive. So jumping ahead a little bit, we're going to talk about Queen's third album, which is Sheer Heart Attack. This one has quite a few great bass songs on it, so it was hard to narrow it down, but we're going to kick it off with the classic Killer Queen. This one has a good mix of John's techniques in it. You can see he's doing that classic bass player style playing when you have a piano in the mix, which is sort of following that left hand. But he breaks out from that. It's not just simple root notes walking down. He does some nice little licks, especially I think we're picking it up around the second verse here, and there's this great walk down lick. Now, I've seen a few different people cover it. Some people just do this sort of chromatic slide down the neck, and I think I even saw a few live videos where John does that himself. So the jury's out on whether he's doing sort of a straight slide or playing a riff. For the purposes of this video, I worked out the melody, so it's actually more of a lick. But hey, you know, same kind of sound, but very tasty. Some cool walk-up bits where he breaks away from the left hand of the piano, that sort of straightforward bass. And then I really just like his use of climbing up the neck here, which is something you'll see a lot. So you can see towards the very end, it's on that F, and he goes all the way from the low F on the E string, then jumps up to the A string, and then all the way up to high on the G string. So, you know, very melodic, going very high and using that upper register of the bass. Check it out, Killer Queen. The next one I want to talk about from Sheer Heart Attack is Stone Cold Crazy. Now this one really is in Queen's core rock heavy sound that you heard on the earlier albums. Heavy enough that even bands like Metallica have covered it. I think it was on Garage Inc., whatever that cover album was. Very hard rock, riffy, and a somewhat rare thing for John here is using a pick. You see him use it a little bit more, I think, in the 80s, but in the 70s he was doing mostly fingerstyle, so the straightforward rock here gets the pick treatment, and it's some good riffs. I really like, you'll see after the first set there's a break where the verse should be, and when it drops back in you'll see that there's this quick climb up, this little, I think it's like a little 3/4 section where there's a break, and it does this quick climb up, and then John's doing a lot of very fast picking, and then he does a quick walk down to that B, and then that little and then back into the main riff. So it's a fun one, very riffy, fast, just great rock and roll. Here it is, Stone Cold Crazy. All right, the last one I want to talk about from Sheer Heart Attack is Bring Back That Leroy Brown. Now this is actually, this may have been my favorite song I learned in making this video. I'd heard it years ago, but not really in my regular spinning of Queen music here. But a really, really fun one. It's kind of that old-timey, vaudeville, whatever kind of style that Freddie cooked up. But it's pretty quick, and the bass is really busy, so it's a lot of fun to learn, but pretty easy once you sort of start to see where those syncopated little timing moments are. But it really makes for a really tasty song when it's all locked in, the piano, the drums, the guitar riffs. Some of my favorite little moments I want you to check out here are the quick little, right off the bat on the dun 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 dun, very quick. And I've seen a lot of people cover it and they'll just hit the C and the G. But if you listen closely, you can hear he is hitting that higher octave and getting that quick little lick in there. A lot of walking around the neck, really fun piece. And then towards the end, you'll see after the break, there's a part where he does a walk down riff, little bass solo, which was actually recorded on a double bass. Of course, I just used the electric here, but really cool riff. And then he pops back in with this little number to sync in with the piano and drop back into the main theme of the song. Here it is, Bring Back That Leroy Brown.
Bring back that Leroy Brown. Bring back that Leroy Brown. Bet your bottom dollar bill you're a great boy. Daddy cool with a $19 smile. Took my money out of gratitude and he get right out of town. Gotta get up, steady up, shoot him down. Gotta hit that latitude. Bring back that Leroy Brown. Bring back that Leroy Brown. Big bad Leroy Brown, you got no common sense. You got no brains, but sure got a lot of style. Can't stand no more in this jail. I gotta rid myself of this sin. Gotta get out the heat, step in the shade. Gotta get me that dead or alive.
All right, jumping ahead to A Night at the Opera, one of Queen's biggest albums. Of course, it has Bohemian Rhapsody on it. I actually chose just one song from this one, again, because I wanted to cover as much as we could here, but really, really great bass throughout this album. The song I chose is You're My Best Friend, which coincidentally John wrote, so that's a nice little extra bonus there. But the bass in this one is just so tasty. Right off the bat, he's got a great little riff going instead of just hanging on that C root note. Some high stuff on the G string, little chromatic riffs. And then once you drop into the verse, or I guess it's the pre-chorus, very melodic on the boo-dee, boo-dee-dee-doo, boo-dee-dee-doo-dee-doo, all the way climbing up high on the neck again. It's a technique we spoke about a little earlier. This is when you really start to hear a lot more of that in this mid-70s era of Queen. There's a lot of this climbing stuff that he does high up the neck. And he has the freedom to do that, I think, because of the piano and the electric keyboard here. So it's not like when he goes up high, you're missing that low end or you're missing that rhythm that you get from the bass. So it gives him a chance to stretch out and play some cool leady stuff. Very tasty when he gets up and does those high riffs. And then when you come back out of it again, the Rain or Shine piece, he does some very quick sort of bluesy little riffs and walk downs. Really great stuff, really tasty. And as the song goes on, it even gets a little more complex after what I've shown here. So check that one out in full. Anyway, here's a little piece of it. You're My Best Friend. moving forward to 1976 and Queen's next album, A Day at the Races. This one really, again, A Night at the Opera and A Day at the Races really is just, to me, is just quintessential Queen. They are in top form here. The sort of orchestral stuff, the piano, the operatic things, the layering by Brian, the super melodic bass playing by John, the songwriting is just really at an absolute peak here. I don't even want to call it a peak because it's sustained really throughout the 70s and into the 80s, but this to me is quintessential Queen. The song I chose from it, even though there are so many good ones, I chose the Millionaire Waltz, and this one is really, really tasty. John has this excellent bass playing with Freddie. It's just the two of them in the beginning, Freddie on the piano, of course, John on the bass. Super melodic, a lot of quick riffs, sort of a classical style playing to just really accompany that piano and Freddie's vocal beautifully. Very busy, some odd little timing things in there that make it all the more tasty. But it is just a beautiful piece. And I'm going to give you that whole opening section here. Here it is, the Millionaire Waltz. All right, and the last album we're going to talk about for this episode is News of the World. This is just another huge Queen album. As I mentioned a moment ago, I feel really that A Night at the Opera and Day at the Races are sort of the quintessential Queen, but this really also is just a mega album. This has We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions, Sheer Heart Attack, Spread Your Wings, so many great songs on this album as well, and more great bass playing. The first song I chose from it was We Are the Champions. I've been listening to this one. I mean, who hasn't heard this? I mean, it's just one of the most classic rock songs and classic just pieces of music. You hear it at sports venues, you hear it at concerts, you hear it everywhere. It's just a classic, classic song. And I remember even from being a little kid listening in the intro intently in my little earbuds of all the little bass nuances that you hear, especially when it's just Freddie and the piano on those verses. There's these like great little improv sort of I guess licks. I don't know if they were cooked up or if it just seemed like an improv live, but great little melodies that come out of John. And then when it actually gets into the song and it opens up, some nice little melodies matching the piano. And this is another one of those songs in a classic John Deacon style. As it goes on, each verse and chorus, there's more embellishments and more riffs and walk-ups. But I want to start at the beginning here when you can really hear the bass well against that opening piano. So check out some of these riffs, concluding with the end of the first chorus with those awesome slides that go up the neck until the end of the chorus. Here it is, We Are the Champions. right, and the last song we're going to talk about today is Spread Your Wings. Now, this one is a personal favorite of mine. I always love this song. I don't know why. Pretty simple. Maybe it's the story of that downtrodden guy who sort of goes up against the odds and, against his critics. Maybe I just like a good story, but great song here, some tasty bass. This is another one, by the way, written by John Deacon. So nice little bonus there to see his songwriting and how he builds his bass playing into it. Some nice licks to start it off and some great piano by Freddie in the intro. And John comes in over that, and we pick up here right at that first verse when the band drops in. And some nice movements and some great little, a great example here of how you can sort of take a simple piece and make it a little more busy, a little more funky, and just more fun on the chorus here. It's a simple progression, and he could just be hanging on the roots, maybe throw a fifth in there, but he does this nice root fifth octave and bounces between them. Fun rhythm, and he kind of mixes it up on each one. And if you listen to the other choruses, there's some variations and some real good variations on the other verses, so definitely check out this one in full. But nonetheless, one of my favorite Queen songs and some good bass playing in it. Here it is, Spread Your Wings. Alright guys, well that's going to do it for this episode. As I mentioned, I am going to try to do one more episode on John Deacon, kind of going against my new vision of the channel. I'm really trying to do one video per person to not get too bogged down, but I'm such a huge Queen fan and John Deacon fan, I'm going to break that rule already and do another one just to cover the rest of these classic bass lines he has here going into the 80s. But before then, you might see another few videos. I've loved your feedback. Some of you have said you'd be interested in seeing maybe some equipment reviews or walkthroughs, things like that. So you might see one of those first. Also, I'm probably going to put out a video, just a quick update on Patreon and how I want to simplify that. Thank you to those of you who've taken a chance to go over there, check out my bio. A lot of good stuff on there, guys. But once again, thanks for watching. Check out my band, check out the Patreon, and keep watching. Stay tuned for more Legends of Bass.